Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of the People in Fundraising Conversations series, where I welcome guests from the nonprofit social impact sector to share with our audience how they entered the profession, also what keeps them motivated and engaged in the work of nonprofits, whether that's in higher ed, healthcare, or various other sectors of philanthropy, as well as giving our guests an opportunity to tell us a little bit about who they are outside of the role that they currently hold. And so for today, I'm really excited to welcome Kelli North to our program. Good morning, Kelli.
Good morning, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I got a bit of a ghostly pallor going, but that's fitting. Fall is my season. Halloween is my holiday, so we're just going to roll with it.
Nice. And I love that Gothic background. And you mentioned, for our audience, tell us, please, where that is.
That is the University of Michigan Law Library. It's one of the older buildings on campus. We were founded in 1817. I don't know when that building is exactly dated to, but it is one of the old school style buildings on our campus. The students like to refer to it as Hogwarts. But I always love to go there as a student at Michigan. But it is very quiet and intimidating. So maybe not the best place for an undergrad to be studying, but beautiful nonetheless. I thought it'd be nice for today to have this as my background.
Yeah. Oh, that is terrific. And Kelli, you just mentioned Halloween is your favorite holiday. So we will aim to air this interview on Monday, October 30th, which is the day before Halloween. These interviews air on Mondays. So thank you for that lead on Halloween. And fall is also my favorite season. And nothing like fall in the New England area or the upper Midwest. So
gorgeous. It makes up for the winter that follows, or at least partially.
That's true. So Kelli, if you could please tell our audience what your role is at the University of Michigan. And I don't want to give it away, but there's a particular focus of your work that if you could just quickly talk about in your introduction. That was a major reason why I wanted to have you on as a guest today. So please.
Yes. Well, as mentioned, my name is Kelli North. I'm the Assistant Director of Development Research and DEI Initiatives at the University of Michigan. I'm here in the Office of University Development. We are decentralized, so I'm in the central development office here on campus. And yeah, DEI is an official part of my role. That is relatively new. That started in May of 2022, I believe. But it's been a role that's been kind of years in the making. So there's a bit of story about how that came to be, but I kind of have a foot in both worlds. So I spend a lot of my time with the prospect development and analytics team, but I also attend all of our DEI team meetings and I help them with their initiatives. And it's really seen as like a bridge between DEI theory and making it reality. I'm sure that we're going to touch on this later, but I think when we talk about DEI a lot, it's very theoretical and it's not always clear or it's not always easy to work it into your best practices, particularly in prospect development, where we have our own way of doing things. And we're specifically looking at wealth and how that manifests in mostly traditional ways. So the role is new. So far, so good, but there's definitely been a lot of interesting challenges along the way.
Interesting. I am so fascinated to get to that point in our conversation today. So thank you for that intro. And excited to learn more. So before we get to that point, as we customarily do with each conversation, Kelli, if we can go back in time and have you share with us how you entered the nonprofit sector, please.
Yeah, I think like most people, I got into it in a very random way. If you ask anyone in prospect development, at least on our team, how they came to the job, we all have different answers. We all have different degrees. That's kind of what makes our team structure unique, which we can talk about later. We each have specialty areas. But I was a student at Michigan, both for undergrad and graduate school. I was completing my master's in social work here at the School of Social Work. And I was focusing on policy, nonprofit management, community organizing, just really trying to figure out what I was going to do with that degree. I knew I wanted to be involved in activism in some way and social justice in some way. But it wasn't clear to me what that would look like. I had plenty of internships, but none of them were exactly something that I felt like I wanted to do for the rest of my life. But I asked for advice from a lot of people. I did informational interviews, and one common thread that went through all of them was, if you want to be involved in nonprofit management, if you want to be involved in nonprofits in any like meaningful, impactful way, you need to familiarize yourself with fundraising. And so, to me, I was a first-gen college student. I had no idea what like philanthropy was, what that entailed beyond the most basic level. So I did an informational interview at the Office of University Development here, and I didn't know what job I wanted. I relied on one of our HR people to kind of point me in the right direction. And there was a research role on the prospect development team that was open, and she saw my research experience just from my master's program and was like, well, this seems like it could maybe be a fit. I don't know. And so I just kind of applied for it without fully knowing what it even was or what it would be. And here I am almost 10 years later. So she saw something that I didn't. But I certainly was not aware of this or even really development before I started working here.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I would love to follow up a little bit about what it means for you as a first gen college student. And you've mentioned you have undergrad and master's degrees from Michigan, you work there. Is there anything that stands out to you about that first gen college student aspect of who you are and the University of Michigan? And, what has been a key ingredient to keeping you connected to your alma mater all this time?
I think it's probably the like most predictable connection, which is that I came here on a scholarship, and without that scholarship, there's no way that I was going to be able to afford an institution like this. When I applied, I knew it was my dream school, but I knew that it might be a long shot because of that, and because my high school wasn't prestigious or special in any way necessarily. So that is the connection. I think no matter how tedious the day-to-day work gets, it always is helpful to remember that opportunity that I was given, and that my work, even though it might not feel like it in the moment, ultimately serves that goal. It's ironic because the scholarship that I came here on falls under one of the schools, colleges, and units that I'm the researcher for. So I get to help, that unit find donors for that same scholarship that I received. So there's actually a really direct connection to my experience as a first gen college student. And I will say, like, in the past 10 years, I graduated undergrad in 2010. So in the past 13 years, ouch. There's been a lot of work on campus around the first gen college student experience, but I always remember how confused and what a fish out of water I felt like I was here. It was I had a really hard time in undergrad. Grad school, great. I found my feet. I finally felt like I was, I knew what I was doing, but undergrad was very confusing and hard for me. So I think about that when my work is very tedious in the day to day.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's very touching. Thank you for sharing that, Kelli. I think, I grew up next to a college campus in Massachusetts, and so it was just kind of ingrained in me all these years. But to hear from different perspectives of just how transformational a university experience, education, the social aspect, all of that to build up the person. So thank you for sharing that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, changed my life.
That's awesome. And now you're helping to change others' lives. So that's really, Really
That's
cool.
the goal.
That's right. Yes. So if I have if I've done my research correctly, you've been in your current role at the University of Michigan for just over 1 year, and you mentioned the role officially began in May of 22. If you could spend a few minutes, Kelli, please, talking with us about how the particular focus of the DEI initiatives came about, what impact, what ideas did you bring? Were you part of the discussion? Just anything about how that started. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think my DI involvement kind of came about the way that it does for many people, which is me volunteering for DEI committees, task force, just asking questions all the time about the way that we were doing things, about why aren't we doing this? What about when this happens? I was volunteering as a regular researcher. It was always something that I wondered about. Like I said, I had no real philanthropy experience. And when I got into it, you start off with a very shallow understanding. We were in the midst of a campaign here at Michigan, the Victors for Michigan campaign, which wrapped a few years ago. That was a $6 billion campaign. So, we were talking about major donors. And to me, it seemed so glamorous and foreign and like, what is this? Who are these people that are just giving away all this money? So it was very strange to me. And I think I was looking for a way for me to fit in, a way that I could contribute coming from the world that I come from and my experiences. And my lens at that point, fresh out of a master's program, was social justice. And what does this mean for the students like me on campus who will never be this type of donor? And these people have such a big impact on our institution. How do we make sure that they don't have an undue impact on our institution, an unbalanced impact on our institution? If these are the only people sitting at the table, then what does that mean for a student like me at Michigan in my experience? So I was volunteering, I was going to events, I was, looking for lectures that had to do with diversity in any way. And I inevitably ran across Kat Walsh, who works here at the University of Michigan in our office of development. Not only is she a senior leader on our leadership team, but she also heads up our development specific DEI office. So she is a leader on our leadership team, a fundraiser, and she heads all of our DEI strategic planning for development. And so I kept running into her and talking to her and asking her, what about this? What about this? And I'm sure I was just being very annoying. But eventually it turned into me being involved with some of her projects, and it just kind of grew over time. And luckily I had a supervisor, Heather McPhail, and a team director, Craig Leonard, who were creative and care about their team and what the team is passionate about. And so that turned into me spending officially 10% of my time in that prospect development DEI overlap and being paid 10% of my time out of the DEI team budget. So it was kind of like a guinea pig for this model of hybrid roles that we are now exploring. And over time, that percentage just grew. And then by the time that, I'd been in my role for a while, as of last year, when it was time for promotion, we job crafted, which is an amazing privilege to be able to do, to look at your role and vision. How can I contribute? What are my skills? How do we build a role around that? And so we were able to make that happen. And that's because of the university's commitment and the bold stance that we've taken on DEI. The University of Michigan has said, it doesn't matter what the political landscape is. It doesn't matter if people try to prosecute us. We don't care. We're going to do DEI. We're going to fund DEI. We're going to support it because this is what we believe in. And so it's woven into all of our strategic planning. Every unit on campus has to have a DEI strategic plan. We all have KPIs that we have to meet around DEI activities. And DEI is going to be part of our next fundraising campaign. So it's something that's only going to grow here. And my role is a reflection of our investment in that growth. And then a few months ago, I was able to get a DEI analyst role created to work with me on my team to help me grow the work because I can't do it all myself, unfortunately. So I need help. And so we were able to get that built out.
So cool. And then you answered a follow-up without even knowing it. I was going to ask, do you have people that you manage specifically working on DEI? So
I have two people that I manage, one doing regular research, one DEI specific, although everyone on our team touches DEI in some way or other.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I would love to hear, Kelli, a little bit about not a typical day, because there really aren't typical days, but just walk us through a day where you are, in the trenches, focusing hard on DEI. You mentioned DEI being part of a future Michigan campaign. So just talk us through maybe a particular project without going into a lot of detail, but just to be respectful of privacy issues. But anything comes to mind?
Yeah, I think like the overarching theme of all the projects that I'm touching is we don't want DEI to be extracurricular. We don't want it to be this thing that's separate that we say that we do. We can point to it and say, oh, look, we did DEI. Really, the point of my role is to integrate it into our day-to-day work and to work it into our best practices so that everyone is participating, whether they want to or whether they realize that they are. So a lot of my projects are focused on that, figuring out how to update our best practices. How do we look at things? How do we view a project more holistically, rather than me just leading a DEI committee and then, presenting our findings at the end of the year. It's really integrated into everything that we do. And, some examples of that, we have a DEI data policy, which I know I've met with many people in the PD community about, but we implemented that 2 years ago, maybe 3 now.
Okay.
So any project where someone is looking to diversify their pipeline, diversify their boards, whatever the case may be, there are many pitfalls that you can fall into with tokenizing prospects into those roles. There are really problematic ways that we bucket people according to stereotypes. So anytime we're doing projects like that, we have a policy that we abide by. We have a review process for those projects. So oftentimes I'll be reviewing those projects or working with schools, colleges, and units and gift officers and leadership to help figure out how we're going to reach our goals without falling into those ethical, pitfalls and being shallow about it. How do we do this work strategically, meaningfully, and ethically? I might also be working, we have a group within development professionals of color. So I might be, attending a meeting for that or talking to one of my fellow committee members on that. We are looking to diversify our campaign councils. As I mentioned, we're kind of gearing up for our campaign. So I'm working with our national major gifts team to help figure out what's the best way to do that. Campaign council members are not people that you just meet. They're not discovery prospects. They're people who can give at a very high level and are very engaged. So we've been working way ahead of time of our campaign, trying to cultivate all types of prospects onto these boards, so they're not the same and they're not driving, homogenous initiatives here.
Sure.
So doing that, I'm also working on diversifying the pipeline. So looking at wealth more holistically. Are there indicators that we're looking at that are introducing bias into our system? Are we relating too hard on hard assets? Are we looking too much at real estate without taking into account the history of lending practices in this country, history of redlining? Are we being hyper-focused on certain zip codes and ignoring the surrounding areas that might have more diversity? So we have a couple of projects going around that. I also sit on a committee with other people around the university and other people within development that touch data. So we have a DEI data working group. And that means, people report their identity to the university in many different ways, whether it's through the health system or our alumni portals. So we are working hard to make sure that if someone takes the time to specify their pronouns, their salutations, their identities to the university, we're being respectful and we're sharing that with each other so that everyone can be addressed in the way that they want to be addressed, which is a big challenge in a decentralized environment like we're in. I would love to say we've made great progress there, but we're still kind of, figuring out what the real problem is. And also just like from a prospect development level, I've done a couple webinars on this project, but we have we got a grant, an anti-racism grant from our central DEI office to look at any bias, systematic bias that was introduced into our system. And so our process development team and analytics team, we partnered together and we took a look at the wealth vendors that we pay for wealth data for screening in our system. And so we went to our different vendors and a couple other ones that we had been interested in purchasing data from. And we asked them, how are you taking this into account? Do you think about the way that you're looking at wealth and how that might be, removing people from your pool? And so we went to those companies, we worked with some sample data, and we identified, at least for our constituency, which wealth screening service was less biased. That one was specifically looking at race and ethnicity. So we were actually able to present that project to our leadership team and get them to invest more money in wealth screening services ahead of a campaign, because we were able to say, look, if you don't make this investment, now we know that there was potential bias being introduced into the way that we evaluate wealth. How can we ignore that fact? How can you say that you care about diversity if you're not going to invest in data that helps us address this issue? So that project was great. That also gave us a huge sample data set of prospects to identify as people of color that we are able to refer out to gift officers. So all those things are kind of going on while I'm also still liaising to schools, colleges, and units. And of course, like working with my direct reports and the rest of the PD team on, regular process development projects.
Wow. Thank you so much.
A few things going on.
Yes.
I'm not stressed. What are you talking about?
Holy cow. And specifically for the DEI initiatives, it's you and two people that you manage, correct?
It's mostly me and the DEI analysts that I manage, but we also have a DEI team here within development. I mentioned Kat Walsh earlier, who leads that team. She also has another gift officer that works under her that specifically fundraises for DEI initiatives. And then we have a strategic partner, Kalia Vang, who works on DEI strategic planning and culture within development offices. And then we have Christopher Dreyer, who's also on that team, who supports Kat and Kalia and all of that strategic work. So I partner with that team as well as the DEI analysts that works under me in process development and analytics.
Wow. What a robust operation and doing just critical work. And, in my day job, I'm a team of one at Weber State University, and we've tried to move the needle a bit on, unconscious bias training, and some of the other things you talked about with pronouns, other demographic indicators, and just running into both bandwidth and institutional challenges. And so if I'm feeling this way, I wonder, is your phone ringing off the hook from people kind of across the country saying, I've heard about you, I've seen a webinar Kelli did, are there institutions coming to you for guidance? You mentioned benchmarking earlier, so I've got to think, given how far ahead you are on this really important work, that peers are looking to you for guidance and thoughts. Is that a correct perspective?
Well, thank you for assuming that we're ahead. It's hard to feel that way in the day-to-day. I think, yes, I do get contacted by a lot of people within process development asking me about this. I've done a couple webinars and presentations, so my work is out there in a sense, and so I do. And when I meet with them, people want to hear about projects that we do and how did you do it and what does the DEI data policy look like. And what I always tell them is, what our products and projects look like is way less important than the process that we undertook to make those things happen. So I could share my DEI data policy with you, but actually the policy itself wasn't necessarily the best thing that came out of that. The best thing that came out of that was the focus groups that we formed of community stakeholders to write that policy and the education that we did around that policy. And I think anything that you're going to do that's DEI related is so closely tied in with your organizational culture and structure that it's really hard for me at the University of Michigan to sit here and tell you how to do things at Weber State. It's just, it's possible to replicate something exactly. And so what I always like to talk to people about is what that process was like, how to counter resistance, how to get input from the community and make them feel like they're involved and make them feel like their feedback has been taken into account, even if it's negative feedback. So I think like the process of going through all of these focus groups, DEI trainings, any of that stuff, the process is almost more important than the product at the end of the day, because everyone has to learn from it and everyone has to feel like they have a stake in it, and it has to be integrated into day-to-day work. Like no gift officer is going to listen to you if you go and tell them you have to change everything about the way that you do, everything that you're doing to qualify prospects is wrong. They're not going to respond to that. So you really have to involve them in the whole process and help them understand it's a journey. So that's always what I like to focus on when I talk to people from other institutions, because I think there were so many lessons learned along the way that are much more valuable than if I just sent you a spreadsheet that had like, these are the things we did.
Right.
I just think that's more fruitful.
Yeah, well, that's great input. Thank you, Kelly. And yeah, I just feel like it's such an important topic in the nonprofit world. And I think it's awesome that people like you have such a role at your institution, that you are collaborating with, committee members from different units. It's not just with other potential projects. It's not like, oh, we've figured it out, now we're going to turn to the prospect development people and have them do the back office stuff. So great to hear the seat you have at Michigan.
I try to be at every table being that annoying person, like, well, what about this? Did you guys think about this? You didn't? Okay, well, you probably should. So, it's a process, but I try to be in the room when those things are being talked about.
Sure. And I have to imagine that at least some of that awareness comes from the activism, the social work that you were doing as an undergrad and a grad student, just having those tools and the talking points and the frames of reference.
Yeah, it was. I feel like I may be jumping a bit in your question order. Maybe not though. I mean, so the event that really got me like convinced that this needed to be something that I actually spent serious professional time on. When I was a newer researcher, I had a unit reach out to me, a gift officer who wanted to fundraise for this former secret society that used to be on our campus. And it just so happened that as a student, as part of the Native American Student Association, I had protested against the existence of this secret society because they would use Native American artifacts in like fake ceremonies on campus. And it was just really offensive and awful. And it just so happened that society was the children of prominent university donors, of really important people. It was like a prestigious secret society. And it had a bit of like a skull and bones feel to it almost. Sure. But, that group, we protested against them when I was here as a student. And so it was a bit shocking for me to get called into that meeting and then get blindsided that someone wanted to raise money for this group. Yeah. They had changed their name on campus and they stopped doing ceremonies because the university asked them to stop. But that was in the early 2000s. So this was happening pretty recently. It was still pretty fresh. And so I went into that meeting and just the gift officer had no idea of the history of the group. They knew that there had been some controversy, but they didn't know all of the nitty-gritty details and what a wound that was on the relationship between the Native American community and the university. It was something where, if I was just an alumni that didn't work in development, I would say, I'm not going to donate here unless we fix this problem. So like, that's how big of a deal it was. And so I went into that meeting, found out the gift officer had no idea what it was. And that kind of planted the seeds of the goals that I had around the DEI data policy and some of the supportive work that went around that. Like one of the things that came out of the DEI data policy was that we created a resource of the history of this institution with social activism, so that a gift officer researcher, when they start at the university, has no excuse to not know about those things. And it's also something that maybe will help them feel more comfortable going into a situation, because if a donor brings something up about their experience on campus that maybe was negative, they have this resource that they can refer to and say, oh, this whole thing happened with the secret society. So, it was all part of our ultimate strategy, but that one request really planted the seed for all the work that I do now. That one terrible meeting.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Wow. That must be, given your involvement with the Native American Association on campus and the history of that secret society, I can imagine that was a difficult, sensitive topic to wade into. So
yeah, and I think like it's an example of how no organization is exempt from having to do this work and face our history. I mean, if you work for a college, any college, where did the founders of your university get their wealth? What land is your university on? How is that acquired? Who used to live there? I think like as universities, a lot of times there were land treaties saying like the tribes are going to give this land to this university in the hopes that their children could be educated here. That promise has largely not been fulfilled. I know on our campus, it's usually less than 1% is Native American of our student body. I think that's pretty common across the US. If you work for a museum, where did you get your collections from? Who's telling the story on behalf of those people that the collections are supposed to be representing? I think no one is exempt from this, and we all have to face our history. And if you're trying to do DEI work without facing that history and facing those tough truths about your institution and what you stand for, then you're only doing half the job.
Yeah, I agree.
Get off my soapbox, but I really feel strongly about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you and I were connecting by email for this interview, and at the bottom of your emails there is that land acknowledgement piece, and it's probably a paragraph and a half, and richly detailed about these are the Native American tribes by name in the Michigan area, the campus area and the state area. So really important acknowledgements, and I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like we're hearing more about those, at least in the nonprofit world. I've been on webinars or listened to presentations, and the panelists, the speakers, introduce themselves and say, and I need to acknowledge that I work for this institution and the land was, acquired, or however they term it. But really, it was taken from the native populations. And I think such an important and tragic piece of our country's history. I'm more aware of that now living out here in Utah than I was before. I was on vacation 3 years ago, driving up to Montana, and so I was thinking about the Battle of Little Bighorn. There's a place in western Montana called the Madison Buffalo Jump, which I still want to see. And this is getting off topic, but I think I like bringing out some of the personal anecdotes, not just the professional. And so just to learn about how Native American tribes would use these buffalo jumps, where they would, they'd herd buffalo up a cliff, and the buffalo would fall over the cliff, and there would be men on the ground ready to use every piece of that fallen buffalo. Very little waste. And I think, such incredible stewards of the land that they were blessed with. So
I would encourage everyone to check out Native Americans in Philanthropy. It's an organization that wants to address these issues, wants to address how little philanthropic dollars go to tribal communities. They also talk a lot about data erasure, where, if you're looking at a demographic breakdown, you'll often see all the regular categories for race and ethnicity that we see in other surveys, but at the bottom, sometimes it will say other. And often, the Native American population is a small enough percentage that they just lump it into other. So it's like, not only is it such a small percentage, but now you're completely erasing it. That came up with census data a couple of years ago, the same issue, the otherization of identities. So I think data erasure is something that's really important to think about, like as analytics and research professionals too. Like, how are we representing our data? How are we representing the people that are within that data set? It's really important. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm a white passing person talking about DEI. I was on an APRA panel a couple of weeks ago, and almost everyone, I think everyone in the panel was white or white passing. And I think that's important because I'm not a tribal member. My grandfather was. My grandmother was half Mexican. So like I have a little bit of like heritage that inspired me to do this, but I'm white passing. I have privilege to do this work that maybe some of my colleagues who have more visible identities don't have. And I think that's an important learning piece that you have when doing DEI work. There are times when, yes, I should be the person sitting at the table, but there are other times when I should not be the person sitting there. So that's another important piece of this, is who is representing this work, who is the face of the work, who's doing the labor, who's carrying the emotional burden of this work. If we're asking our colleagues of color to shoulder the burden of doing some of this DEI work while they're also being the most impacted by some of this bias and some of the microaggressions and just outright aggressions that happen, those are all considerations that we have to make when we're forming committees, task force, working groups, when we're deciding who gets to be in this role. Those are all factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that piece about asking our colleagues of color to do even more work. Like we all need.
Their white gift officer colleagues, like, something that I hear very frequently from gift officers who might be resistant to the idea of like diversifying the pipeline. They might not really see a reason why they need to do it. And, some of the excuses that you'll hear sometimes come up is like, oh, well, I just need more education, or I need more talking points so that I can go into that conversation feeling more prepared. And my response to that is very often, well, your colleagues of color see people that don't look like them every single day in their work. They don't need training to do that. Why do you need training to go have a conversation with another human being? So, that's something that comes up pretty frequently too. And that's always what I'll tell them.
Wow. Yeah. And, I'll just say I had not considered that equation. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Wow. Kelli, this has been such an enriching conversation so far. Thank you, for the depth and the breadth of the topics you've covered. We have about 10 minutes left, and we have a few other questions. So if I can just take a moment here to look through where we are in the program, because this has just been so wonderfully educational. And I know it'll be a benefit for our audience. Let's see. If we maybe go to that last question, because I think there is some really meaningful connection to some of the professional and personal anecdotes you've just shared with us. So Kelli and I, does that sound okay, first of all?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you. So Kelli and I first got connected about 18 months ago in an APRA committee meeting. It may have been the APRA chapter summit or some type of event. And I remember being really impressed because we were talking about DEI work at this forum. And you put something in the chat to the effect of Native American philanthropy initiatives are my focus. They are something I'm really passionate about. And you have talked a little bit about both your personal history with your grandfather and your grandmother, and the influence that has been for you. And you just mentioned the Native Americans in Philanthropy group as well. So how do those personal, professional, the academic setting, your involvement with the Native American Association as a student? How do all of those come together to influence the work you do, and also to keep it top of mind in your professional and your worldview, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I just think me as a person, I don't do very well with boundaries between my personal life and my work life. So I think it's actually really hard for me to forget all of that when I'm working. I think one mistake, not mistake really, but like one really difficult part of my job is separating my passion for it from the work. So, DEI work is often really slow. Progress is really slow. With any like big bureaucratic institution, progress in anything is slow and measured at such a low rate. And that's so frustrating for me personally. Like I like working quickly. I like achieving things. I like making progress. I want to be progressive. So I want to be on the cutting edge of whatever is happening. And it's so hard to do in a really large institution within higher ed. It's just very hard to do. The wheel turns slowly. The budget happens once a year. It's like it's really intense. And so I have a really difficult time like accepting that. And so I constantly have to remind myself, like, calm down. This is, you have to accept the wins that you've gotten. I think that's something that we all forget to do, which is we've made tremendous progress, and it's really hard. It's really easy to ignore that when you look at how far we still have to go. So that's something that I think about a lot. The comment that I made, I can't remember what it was in reference to, but it was probably in reference to the story that I told about how I started the DEI work with that secret society project. And it's something that I still think about a lot. Like whenever I'm prospecting or just creating a regular list for a gift officer that I'm going to send, just like, trip preparation, it's something I always think about, like scanning down the list of names that I've cultivated and verified. I'm always thinking like, who are these people and what do they want for the university? And what does that mean for our future? So I just think for me, it's always top of mind. Like the people that I send out to gift officers are going to be the people sitting at the table helping steer the future, who are giving research dollars, who are going to events and recruiting other committee members. So that's something that I'm always thinking about, and that comes from my background and my experiences. So I also think about people like my parents that are never going to be major donors, don't know anyone who's a major, I think about them and what they want for their children and their future. And I think that is motivation for me. It's really frustrating to be so personally connected to your work, but it's also motivating because I think that, I'm social work by background. And so I feel like if I'm fighting the good fight, that keeps me going. But, I do recommend that everyone look at Native Americans in philanthropy. They have great data resources. They have a lot of great visualizations that you can use. And I would also recommend that everyone read Decolonizing Wealth, which is an amazing book. And it talks about higher education and just the history of higher education philanthropy. And it's really great. And the author's website is also really helpful. And he does a lot of, speaking tours. So anytime that you can get in on that, do it.
Wonderful. I just made a note about that book, Decolonizing Wealth. So Kelli, when your interview airs, I will add links to that book as well as the Native Americans in Philanthropy group. I follow them on LinkedIn as well, but just to amplify that message. So,
and also, like U of M, diversity.umich.edu, all of our DEI strategic plans are public. Anyone can go in and look at our strategic plan and see what our goals are. We do it in 5-year cycles. So we just finished DEI 1.0, which was about awareness and education and preparation. We're launching DEI 2.0, which now lasts for accountability and measurement of progress. Now that we've learned about it and talked about it, what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to prove that we're committed? So all of that stuff is publicly available, diversity.umich.edu.
Awesome. I will make note of that as well and put that in the links. So thank you so much. This has been, and we're at the top of the hour, but this has been just an enriching and motivating conversation, Kelli. I really am inspired by how you talk about, you mentioned you don't find it easy to separate your personal and professional, and it just blends together. And that in itself, I feel like is an important piece of who you are. So really encouraging. So thank you.
It's been really great talking to you. Such good questions. And yeah, I appreciate being asked.
Yeah, my pleasure, Kelly. This was really, it was a little bit in the making.
I'm sorry about that. I was hard to track down.
No, totally. It was well worth it. And thank you for sticking with me at reaching out. I just remember in that chat, May of 22, I'm like, I have to get Kelli North on the program. And at that point, like, this was barely off the ground, and I'm like, I'm kind of taking a risk. Not too many people knew of the project. So thank you for sticking with me and being on the program today. I can tell you put a lot of thought into your answers and preparation. So I definitely appreciate that as well. And I'm excited and cheering you on, both with the upcoming campaign and the DEI initiatives as part of that, and grateful for the work you do in APRA community, specifically to be a trusted resource for DEI work. So you wear many hats, and I am just honored to have you on the program today.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy to talk with anyone who wants to reach out and rant, misery dump with me. Please join me in my fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also it's great work. It's just hard.
Yes. Yeah. And I would love to have you back on the program, in a couple of years, because you, in your last answer, you talked about, looking to the future, and you mentioned, your parents, and, the impact for children and beyond. I would love to see, where you have come, where the team has come at Michigan a few years down the road, and kind of check in if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I feel like our stuff is barely off the ground. That's what it feels like day to day. So hopefully in a few years, things will be, accelerating. Going to a donor event in November. So that will be a first for someone from our PD team to be interacting with donors directly. So things are changing, and the role is going to be ever changing. So yeah, I'm excited to see what's in store. It's going to be a lot of work, I'm sure, but I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cheering you on, Kelli, and thank you again for your time today. And for our audience, I'll be airing Kelli's conversation on LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as my website, peopleinfundraising.com, on Monday, October 30th. Again, right before Kelli's favorite holiday, Halloween. And we will include those links at the valuable resources you mentioned. So thank you so much, Kelli, and we'll be back next week with another conversation.
Thank you.